say Joe Rogan is a controversial character is probably the biggest understatement I can make.
Alex, have you ever done DMT?
No.
Do you want to? You've done regular DMT too, right?
Yes.
Does the experience mirror taking synthetic 5-MeO DMT? Have you ever had psychedelic experiences?
It probably doesn't actually do justice to the vast amount of negative labels that he has received the last few years. Now, full disclosure, I am someone that has listened to a lot of Joe Rogan, so I do feel like I do have some idea of his character, and this video is not about me defending Joe for any sort of particular viewpoint he has. I will be interjecting with my own personal opinion of Joe, especially of certain things that he said, but the idea is to look at this as objectively as possible and to kind of really figure out, is he these things that the mainstream media have been labeling him as, or is it an oversimplification for someone that's very nuanced and has different ideas and different beliefs? I think, like a lot of people, Joe is flawed, and he does say a lot of things that are stupid and a lot of things that don't make sense. But I think if you're recording yourself for 3 hours a day every day, you're going to say some stupid shit. You're going to say things that are contradictory. You're going to say things you don't really mean. And I think that's kind of partly why he does get a lot of hate. But that being said, let's look at Joe Rogan and why people love to hate him. For people who might be living under a rock and don't necessarily know who Joe Rogan is or why people love to hate him, it all started at the end of 2009 when Joe would, with his co-producer Brian Redban, would release an episode called the Joe Rogan Experience. Now at this time, podcasts weren't really a thing. They weren't very popular. Not a lot of people watched them, but he was convinced that if he just put in the work and put in the time. He also decided to do these long form, 3-hour conversations with people where there was no commercial breaks, there was nothing to stop the flow of the conversation, and you could really get into the nuance about different topics. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people at that time, because traditional media doesn't do these long form conversations where you really get into the ideologies of people and people's perspectives and any certain topic, whether it be scientific or whether it be religious or political, whatever topic you want to insert there. He was able to have these long form conversations, and I think it really resonated with people, and that's why people to this day still listen to the podcast. Some people that don't know Joe from his podcast might know him as a stand-up comedian, or they might know him as the UFC commentator, or if you're old enough you might just know him as the Fear Factor guy. He would change podcasting in a whole different way when he made a Spotify exclusivity deal for over $100 million. Probably the biggest payout you'd ever see in a podcast. It's certainly something in his own world, in his own community of comedians, has become huge. Like, there's not one comedian in America that doesn't have a podcast now. So he's had such a huge influence culturally in the podcasting world, and he still gets the millions and millions of downloads per month. He still would be, in terms of listeners, the highest in the world, even after about 2 or 3 years into this Spotify deal that he has. To say that Joe Rogan has had some very controversial guests on his podcast would be another huge understatement. Now, his thinking behind having a lot of these people on is that it's important to have an open dialogue with people, even if you don't agree with them, whether it be politically, whether it be religiously, etc., etc. So he's had some people on who he feels he could learn from and also hope maybe change their perspective. One that a lot of people would know is Alex Jones. Now, Alex Jones is, I could do about 10 videos on Alex Jones. Alex Jones is probably the biggest, wackiest nut job I've seen.
I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
not the most woke word to use, but he's had his own show called InfoWars, which if you watch it you feel frustrated because he sprouts a lot of misinformation about things and he doesn't really have sources to back it up. Like one of the biggest controversies with Alex Jones right now is that he's being sued, basically saying that the Sandy Hook thing wasn't real and that, you know, it was all fake, and, you know, there was actors, but it's quite a disgusting point of view to have. If you watch Joe Rogan and you watch Alex Jones and you laugh at what he's saying, you don't have to agree with what he's saying, but you can just laugh at the stupidity of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think if you sit there and you genuinely believe what Alex Jones is saying, then in my opinion you're a fucking moron. If he says, you know, we're being controlled by lizard people, or the water's turning frogs gay, or whatever the fuck, do your research and find out for yourself. The most infuriating person he's had on for me in recent years is Ben Shapiro. If you don't know Ben Shapiro, he's a conservative in America. He's Jewish. He's very much against gay marriage and gay rights. He doesn't believe that gay people are equals. He thinks that if you're gay you should ignore your desires.
What do you think a gay guy is? Do you think they're making a choice, Or do you think that this is how they were born?
So the religious point of view on this, and I think this is actually just the general conservative point of view on human action generally, is I don't know, meaning that for the vast majority of people, I would assume that they have a biological drive to engage in that behavior. But the traditional sort of will point of view is that biological drive does not necessarily match up to the activity you ought to engage in. Right? Men, for example, have a biological drive to impregnate many women.
Which is it's ridiculous. And to be fair to Joe, like Joe doesn't agree with Ben Shapiro.
But why do you care? Like, as a person who's a rational thinker, it's pretty clear that people are gay. And I don't really think that this is a decision they make in terms of like, I'm going to make a clear choice to defy God and be gay. I think they're just gay.
And as someone like me who listens to Joe Rogan's podcast, I would always listen to the controversial guests not because I agree with the ideology or the thought process that these people have, but because I'd be interested to see where they're getting their point of view from, like what has caused them to feel this way towards a certain people or towards a certain race or whatever it might be. And I think if you can have these open conversations with these people, even if you don't agree with them, you can still hopefully change their mind and hopefully learn something from them and they can learn something from you. But the idea we should just ban everyone that we don't agree with, nobody learns, nobody grows, nobody changes. The only way for people to change and grow is to have these conversations and to have them with people they don't agree with. Now, again, the argument always is that we shouldn't let these people have platforms because they shouldn't be allowed to sprout their ideologies. It's not good for people that are easily swayed. The idea that it's promoting these ideas, I think, is a bit disingenuous. I think it's okay to have these people on and to question where they're coming from. And Joe does fight with these people and he does kind of question their beliefs and why they are that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. One thing he's been accused of quite frequently is being transphobic. One thing that Joe has said is that basically that there is kids nowadays in certain circumstances that are very young, teenagers and younger, who do not feel that they're in the right body and they want to transition.
I was like really super positive about it. And
oh my God!
How they're bringing the kid to therapy and shit and aiding his transition. Like, he's fucking 3. And this, I just read this like 2 days ago. I was like, this is so nuts. There's so much of this going on right now. It's also very dangerous because they start wanting to fuck with the kid's hormones. Like, you gotta let the child develop. There's no real science into what the fuck happens when you put hormone blockers into a 3-year-old and try to transition him into a girl. How could you do that with a 3-year-old?
I know.
I mean, how do you know? I mean, you just don't. And anybody says that you do, you're crazy. People change. You change when hormones get entered into your body, and maybe you won't be the most masculine man in the world, and maybe you will turn into a woman someday. Maybe. But give yourself a goddamn chance to just exist.
If you want to hear my perspective on it, I think that if a young kid does not believe they're in the right body, I think it's better to let them grow and mature and make a decision when they're older rather than when they're younger. I'm not suggesting in any sort of way, and I don't think Joe is, that they shouldn't be allowed transition at all. I think the point is that let the kids grow up and make the informed decision as adults rather than when they're very young and it's irreversible. And he is labelled as child abuse. If you do that to an 8-year-old, if you change their biology at such a young age, most people should allow for the kid to grow and change and develop. And if you decide when you're older, like when you're an adult, when you're 18 or 17, 18, when you've gone through puberty and you decide that this isn't for me, this isn't who I am, I'm totally 100%, I support you 100%, you be who you want to be. And I genuinely feel sorry for people that are in a situation where they feel they're not who they should be. I can imagine that's very tough. One of the biggest issues Joe has mainly, and he's gotten a lot of hate for this as well, is basically if you're in a certain competition like weightlifting, that kind of stuff, like deadlift, squats, trans women, so men who have transitioned into women, are competing in the women's competitions and they are dominating the women's competitions. When I say women, I mean biological women, cis women who, been women their whole lives. So his point is,
that's a ridiculous amount of weight for a woman to lift. And if you're going to be a real woman, a biological woman, and lift that kind of weight, you have to be a real outlier.
Yeah.
It's very rare.
Yeah.
But this is so ridiculous.
Wow.
Oh
Yeah.
What is this? What is this guy's quote?
What
What
does
does
it
this guy?
say?
One guy in the comments say, "Congratulations on your excellent performance. Screw anybody who tries to knock achievements. The hard work speaks for itself." Hey,
Yeah.
whoever you are, fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck you
Yeah,
and your
fuck you.
nonsense. You're the
Okay,
reason why this
Gilman.
shit is happening in the first place because people tolerate this.
Yeah.
That is nuts. If you had a daughter that trained her whole life to be a weightlifter and she's really into it, and this fucking guy decides he identifies as a woman and then competes
Comes
as
in.
a woman in weightlifting, just fucking stop.
Yeah.
Everybody just stop.
Men that transition to women, because they were men, are naturally stronger. So even when you transition to a woman, you're still going to be physically stronger. So his point is that if you're in competition, it's unfair on the women who will never be able to get to that certain level of strength because they're naturally women. Oh, I don't think that's an unfair point. I think, trans people are totally allowed and totally okay to be in these competitions. I just think that if you're going to put trans women against cis women, then the problem there is that cis women are not going to be able to compete because they're not going to have that physical strength. I can understand that perspective, and there's been a lot of women that have come out and said that it's unfair for them because they can't compete against trans women because they just can't physically get to that level of strength that trans women can. Like Men's Health, for example, has an article that is stating that Joe Rogan is spreading transphobic hate speech and is putting lives in danger. I don't think that's a fair thing to say. I think that's very simplistic. I think it's oversimplifying a very nuanced, complex issue. I mean, if you listen to Joe Rogan, and I'll say this throughout the whole time, like if you listen to Joe Rogan and you think he hates trans people and you want to be violent towards it because you listen to Joe Rogan, you're a fucking moron. And I think it's fucking stupid and annoying that these fucking traditional media, they keep promoting this trans hate towards Joe, but to say that you can't openly talk about certain things because it will cause certain hate and certain violence, I think that's just a ridiculously overly simplified, lazy argument. When it comes to transphobia, I don't agree that he's transphobic. I don't think, based on what he said, I think he's made some points that are somewhat fair, although would be considered controversial. But like I said, I think Joe and myself included, I think they have every right to change. They have every right to be what makes them happy. I would 100% support that, and I am not promoting any sort of hate or any sort of violence towards people. And if you watch this video and think what I'm saying promotes that, then you're a fucking moron. Now at this point you probably think that I'm just a Joe Rogan fanboy and I'll defend anything and everything he says, and that you some of you probably just want to label me as the things he's being labeled as. One thing I 100% do not agree with Joe Rogan is his viewpoint on COVID.
Disease that kills some folks, and there's a disease that we, in the beginning stages of this pandemic, thought was going to be far more severe than it turned out to be, and they never adjusted. That's the problem. The problem is it's still not good. You don't want to catch COVID, but the vast majority of people who get it will be fine. 78% of the people that are hospitalized are obese.
The biggest thing with Joe with COVID basically is that he has stated that it's not as bad as it's being made out to be. He has also stated that if you're young and healthy and you exercise and you eat well, that you don't need to be vaccinated.
I don't think that if you're a young, healthy person that you need it. Their argument was you need it for other people.
So you don't transmit the virus.
That makes more sense.
I can see where he comes from in the sense that needing to exercise and being healthy is important and it will help you have a stronger immune system, but statistically speaking, more people that die from COVID have other conditions, whether they be obese or heart conditions, etc., etc. And I think promoting a healthier lifestyle is good. Now, I think it's fair to make a point, a lot of people say he's anti-vax, which I think is, again, a lazy label. He's not anti-vax in the sense that he's not been vaccinated before. He's just anti-vax in this particular vaccine that we've had.
I didn't say I'm not an anti-vax person.
Right.
In fact, I said I believe they're safe and I encourage many people to take them.
Unfortunately, like anything else, I would agree that vaccines are good. Of course, I am vaccinated myself, but the idea that all vaccines can help everyone isn't obviously true. And unfortunately, there is always going to be a small percentage of people who are going to have a bad reaction, and unfortunately, some people will die because of it as well. I don't think that's something we can have much control over. I don't think it's a good enough reason not to be vaccinated. Now, to be fair to Joe, he doesn't buy into the whole microchip, 5G, Bill Gates bullshit that a lot of people peddle. So I think you can give him some credit for that. But I do think it's dangerous, a lot of what he said, because there's a lot of young people that would listen to Joe. And again, I think you're a moron if you do this, but that would take his word as gospel and won't get vaccinated just because his opinion. Now, he has come out a couple of times and said he's not a doctor. You shouldn't not get vaccinated just based on what he says.
I'm not a doctor. I'm a fucking moron. And I'm a cage fighting commentator who's a dirty stand-up comedian who just told you I'm drunk most of the time.
One of the biggest controversies around this as well was that when he actually caught COVID last August, CNN did a big report that said he was taking horse dewormer.
More breaking news this evening. Joe Rogan, an extremely popular podcaster, announced on social media today that he has COVID.
And that is used to treat certain viral things. So it was something that was prescribed to him by his doctor. But CNN came out and did this big piece saying that they focused on the ivermectin and tried to make him out like to be like a wacko.
So we immediately threw the kitchen sink at it. All kinds of meds, monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin, Z-Pak, prednisone, everything.
One of those drugs he mentioned, ivermectin, is something more often used to deworm horses. CDC says there's no evidence it works on COVID. Its increased usage has only led to a substantial increase in overdoses.
As someone that doesn't agree with him and his COVID stance, I still found it a bit unwarranted, a bit juvenile on their point, a bit lazy. I think, like, of course, you know, he was a bit hypocritical saying, oh, like, if you get COVID, you'll be fine. Yeah, he paid for all these expensive treatments because he has that privilege to do so. There was a open letter that was signed by 270 US healthcare professionals, scientists and professors that asked for Spotify to drop the podcast, stating that he was spreading so much misinformation about the pandemic. For all you people that think I'm just a fanboy trying to justify Joe Rogan, I'm not. There's another thing that came up recently in this controversy, which, again, like the COVID statements, this is something that is unjustifiable. This is something that is not defendable, and it was a video that was released late last year, I should say, and it was a clip from Joe Rogan's one of his original episodes where he says some racist terms, and he talks about being in a black neighborhood and refers to like being in Planet of the Apes.
There's a clip from 11 years ago. I was telling a story on the podcast about how me and my friend Tommy and his girlfriend, we got really high. We were in Philadelphia and we went to go see Planet of the Apes. And we didn't know where we were going. We just got dropped off by a cab and we got dropped off in this all black neighborhood. And I was trying to make the story entertaining. And I said, we got out and it was like we were in Africa. It's like we were in Planet of the Apes.
So these statements are clearly disgusting, clearly unnecessary.
And humble apologies. I wish there was more that I could say, but all of this is just me talking from the bottom of my heart. It makes me sick watching that video, but hopefully at least some of you will accept this and understand where I'm coming from.
It's certainly something that I was disappointed in as a fan of Joe's. Joe is very complex in his belief system, and I think that, in my own opinion, I don't think it's as straightforward as labeling as him as either being transphobic or homophobic or misogynistic. I think, as like I said at the beginning of this video, some of those labels are too overly simplistic. I think there's more nuance to it. Of course, you could label him as racist, which I can't dispute, nor would I want to. I think the biggest thing for Joe and for people is the influence he has as on an overall grand scale, because he's such a huge audience. And the argument that he can influence a lot of people based off his beliefs, I can understand that. I can certainly see why people would be concerned. They would think that he's promoting certain ideologies that they don't agree with. But I think at the end of the day, like I said many times in this video, if you watch Joe Rogan and you follow what he says and you take everything he says as gospel and everything he says is right, and you don't do any of your own research and you don't try to figure things out yourself or have your own opinions, then you're a moron and you need to kind of reevaluate what you're doing. Because I think if you blindly follow someone who is also a self-proclaimed moron, you're gonna have some problems. And I think it's fair to agree and disagree. Like myself, I don't agree with everything he has said and done. I think it's important to question and to learn, and to, even if it's someone that you admire or someone you follow, you need to kind of question why you do, and you need to have the common sense to check their sources and check why they're saying they are certain things. So if you're someone that listens to Joe Rogan, like myself, do it with a grain of salt. You know, don't take everything he says as gospel. Don't believe everything he necessarily says. Sometimes he's just taking a piss. Sometimes he doesn't mean what he says. I think it's up to yourself to, you know, inform yourself in a way that is as unbiased as possible and come up with your own informed opinions. Of course, listen and try to understand their perspective, but try get your own as well. I think that's the main thing about this channel for me, You don't have to agree with anything I just said. You can, and that's okay. I won't hate you for that. I don't judge. I'm not here to say, oh, you know, Joe's the best, or you know, fuck the traditional media or anything like that. But just have your own informed opinion. But I am curious what you think after all this. Do you like Joe? Do you hate Joe? Do you listen to Joe? Like, what's your opinion? Do you think the whole thing's ridiculous, or do you think I'm some sort of like fanboy that's just trying to defend Joe for every little bad thing he's done? That's all I got, guys. I could do 50 videos about different Joe Rogan stuff, but I want to keep this nice and condensed. So thanks for watching. As always, thank you to everyone that subscribes and shares and likes my videos. It does mean a lot. Every view really does make me feel good. It does feel good that people take the time to watch my videos. I might not be getting vast thousands and millions of views, but I do appreciate every single person that does take the time to sit and watch my shite and hopefully learn something or laugh or cry or whatever. So thank you everyone sincerely for watching, and you know, like and share like I said, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.